A lot of documents, key documents, relating to your uncle's assassination continue to be classified 60 years later, even though almost everybody involved, not everybody, but almost everybody involved is dead for quite a long time. Do you believe that his resistance to escalating the war in Vietnam in the way you just described was a reason for that assassination? And would you intend to declassify all of those documents immediately upon being president?
I mean, legally, they should have been declassified in 2016. Trump promised he'd do it, and then he never did it. Who knows why he didn't do it? That is a real mystery, because he doesn't like the CIA much. So I don't know why he didn't declassify them. But of course I would declassify them. If this is a 60-year-old murder, why are they still hiding stuff? Why is the institution of the CIA still hiding material on my uncle's death?
If you like this video and you want to help me become president of the United States, go to Kennedy24.com and donate now.
The long-awaited JFK Files are out, in part. 2,800 never-before-seen records on the assassination of JFK were released by the National Archives, but hundreds remain classified. President Trump said he had no choice but to heed warnings from the CIA and FBI to keep some of the files secret for further review. Releasing them unredacted could pose irreversible harm to our national security.
In my last conversation with President Trump in the White House, he called me a lot. And this is after January 6th, so it's 2 weeks before, or a week before he's leaving office. He wanted to run past me the names of people he was going to pardon and sentences he was going to commute. He wanted my opinion on them. Some of them I knew. I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Not too well." And he went off into a tangent about what he thought happened with the election. I said, "You made a promise to the public many times and to me privately that you haven't kept." What? I'll take care of it right now. I said, "You promised you would release the records of the JFK assassination." He said to me, "Judge, if they showed you what they showed me, you wouldn't have released it either." And I said, "Who's they and what did they show you?" And then he said, "Judge, someday when we're on the phone," and then he raised his voice, "and there aren't 15 people listening to the phone call," back to a normal voice, "I'll tell you."
Oh, my God.
I mean, this makes it sound even worse. Who are they? Probably somebody in the intelligence community. What did they show him? JFK's brains blown out?
This is it. It was said by one person that after the Kennedy assassination, there has been no president. They have only been factotums of the system since then.
Yeah.
It may well be the most decisive event in modern American history.
Right.
Hi, everybody. On November 22nd, 1963, my uncle, President John F. Kennedy, was murdered in broad daylight in Dallas. For 60 years, the United States government has covered up the truth about that assassination, which is one of the reasons that it has lost the public trust. Was it a lone gunman, as the Warren Commission concluded in 1964? Or was there a larger conspiracy, as the House Select Committee on Assassination concluded after reviewing a much larger body of evidence in 1979? I have my own thoughts on that subject, but one thing is for sure: the antidote to conspiracy is transparency. In 1992, Congress mandated the release of all records related to the John F. Kennedy assassination by 2017. Well, that date has come and gone. President Trump refused to release thousands of pages of documents, and so did President Biden. No one seriously believes that any national security secrets are at stake 60 years later. What is so embarrassing that they want to hide? I don't know what those documents will show, but I do believe in transparency, which is the only way to restore trust in our government, the trust that began to erode in 1963. And that's why we're circulating a petition to ask President Biden to keep his promise by releasing all JFK assassination documents as required by the law. I'm asking you to share this video and sign the petition, and then I'll send it to President Biden to give him a chance to level with the American people.
Now, President Trump on Thursday ordered the release of more than 2,800 files on the 1963 assassination of former U.S. President John F. Kennedy. But he blocked the release of the remaining 300 files after last-minute requests from national security agencies to keep them under wraps. The redacted documents are undergoing a further 6-month review, but they could stay hidden even after that. White House officials did not provide major details of the contents of the records being shared on the National Archives website. Experts say, at this point at least, they don't expect the documents to reveal any huge bombshells. For the ones that have not been released, officials say they contain highly sensitive information, such as the identities of intelligence officials, law enforcement, as well as other details that may affect foreign policy.
Why do you think that our government could be involved in this evidence?
Listen, when the Warren Commission, obviously, which was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, found that it was a lone shooter, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when Congress, a congressional committee, reinvestigated between 1977 and 1979 the House Select Assassinations Committee, they concluded, and they saw a lot more documentation and had a lot more witnesses than the Warren Commission ever saw. They concluded that my uncle was killed by a conspiracy. And most of the people, for example, Richard Schweitzer, who was the head of the committee, publicly said JFK, the President of the United States, that the CIA was involved in the murder of the President of the United States. And that's quotation. Most of the people on that committee at that time believed it was the CIA, that it was believed certain people in the CIA.
You were 7 at the time? 7 or 8?
I was 10 when my uncle was killed. I was 14 when my father was killed. And today there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, in fact,
why don't the
government
needs to release all of the files on it and let be transparent. Let us see the information.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's still, the law requires, there's a law that requires that all the records of John Kennedy's assassination be released to the public 10 years ago. So they're still holding 5,000 documents. President Biden promised when he was elected that he was going to release those documents. President Trump promised that he would, but the CIA doesn't want them to. And so the question that I think Americans have a right to ask, including members of, my father and uncle's family, is why not? What is it that you don't want to see 60 years later? And by the way, the last tranche of documents released had documentation in there that finally got even the New York Times to admit that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset, that he was working for the CIA. So, if the Warren Commission had known that back in 1964, they would have had a very different time. And the House Assassinations Committee never knew that. Mm-hmm. That was released. We've known that we've had documentation that have known that at least a decade. But some of that documentation became overwhelming in this last tranche. And finally, the mainstream media acknowledged that, he had this relationship with the CIA going back to 1957 or 1958.
He was America's first Catholic president, and his assassination shocked the world. Now, more than 50 years later, President Trump authorizes the release of secret files related to the death of President John F. Kennedy. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. After much anticipation, more than 2,800 files were released yesterday to the public. But at the urging of the CIA and the FBI, the disclosure of hundreds more files have been blocked, at least for now. President Trump tweeting this morning, JFK files are being carefully released. In the end, there will be great transparency. It is my hope to get just about everything to public. The documents capture the frantic days after the assassination when federal agents madly chased after tips, juggled rumors, and followed leads worldwide. One memo says a British newspaper received an anonymous call about big news in the United States 25 minutes before Kennedy was shot in Dallas. The files could take weeks to sift through, but not all of them were released. Hugh Ainsworth, a journalist and witness to Kennedy's assassination, says the CIA and FBI have a lot of reasons for wanting to keep some files secret.
Gosh knows how many people our government tried to kill or did kill during that period of time. And that's why they're afraid of releasing this, because it will hurt. It will hurt the CIA particularly, and to some extent, I think it'll hurt the FBI.
Intelligence agencies pressured Trump to keep some information secret, and the president agrees it's best. I have no choice today but to accept those redactions rather than allow potentially irreversible harm to our nation's security. Federal agencies now have 5 months to explain why the remaining documents should be kept from public view. The president will review their case and make a decision about what should be disclosed. Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who jumped on Kennedy's car after he was shot, says the withholding of information all these years later is very suspect.
The more material they hold back, the more suspicious people become that there's hiding something. And I don't think they need to do that. I think that every bit of information they have should be released.
The released documents also contain reports stamped secret that reveal the suspicions of the error around Cubans and communists. They cast a wide net over varied activities of the Kennedy administration, like its efforts to upend Fidel Castro's government in Cuba.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark.
How do we deal with the fact that our country, maybe since the death of your uncle, has been taken over by the CIA and the FBI and not by people who are running for the office like you are?
My uncle's death was really a turning point in this country. A month before he died, ordered all troops out of Vietnam with National Security Order 263. A week after his death, Johnson revoked that order, and then the next year sent 250,000 troops to Vietnam. My father then ran against Vietnam. He was killed. Martin Luther King was campaigning against Vietnam. He was killed. So those traumas, my uncle's death, King's death, my father's death, then the trauma of Vietnam itself, the trauma later on of 9/11, and ultimately the trauma of COVID pushed us down that road towards complete domination by the military-industrial complex, transforming America from an imperial state abroad, a surveillance and security state at home, and that's where we are today. But the dangerous part of the CIA is the plans division, which is the operations division that does the assassinations, fixing elections, bribing public officials, controlling the media, doing all this mischief, monkey business around the world. You need to separate those functions into agencies so that the espionage division is actually looking over the shoulder of the plans division and looking at blowback and saying, okay, well, you did kill that one terrorist with the drone strike in Afghanistan, but he has 12 brothers, and they all now are wearing suicide vests and causing all these problems. There's always been a concern that if you have a national police agency, it will be weaponized by the president to serve a political agenda. These national police agencies are really a feature of totalitarian regimes like the Stasi and East Germany, the KGB in Russia. 60 CIA agents or high-level officials signing a public letter that said that the Hunter Biden laptop was a fake, was Russian disinformation, when they either didn't know or they knew it was a lie. And that's something that we should not tolerate.
If you like this video and you want to learn more about me and the movement that we're building, please go to Kennedy24.com.
I didn't start anything with the wife. A PAC, which he's very friendly with, released a cover story on my wife, who was a tremendously successful and elegant model. And she was on the cover of GQ magazine. I think it was GQ, right? A GQ magazine is not exactly Penthouse. But she was on the cover of GQ magazine, an artsy picture, but you know, that's why she was a model, really successful. She didn't need to marry me. She was making a lot of money, believe me. In fact, I had to work hard to get her to marry me. It wasn't that easy. It's true. That's so true. You think I'm kidding? So they released this picture, which was, you know, to the people of the state of Utah. I love Utah. I love the people of Utah. But that's not where you want to necessarily send a risque picture. Everybody in Utah got a picture. And I don't think they showed that it was GQ. I don't even think they showed. They took the GQ off. They cut all the stuff out, so they didn't say it was a magazine cover from, you know, a reasonably respected magazine. And it was Melania Trump. Now, and I'm saying this just to clear it up, because Ted said, he took it. I didn't do anything. Then when I saw somebody tweeted a picture of Melania and a picture of Heidi, who I think, by the way, is a very nice woman and a very beautiful woman. I have to tell you, I think Heidi Cruz is a great person. I think it's the best thing he's got going, and his kids, if you want to know the truth. In a certain way, although he's got good intellect, but he doesn't know how to use it. And he was a good debater, but he didn't do well in the debates against me, according to every poll. I mean, every poll, you know, just great debater, except he lost in every single poll and every single debate. So that takes care of the Heidi thing, because Heidi's a terrific woman, but they sent out. Now, he said, that was a pack. We had nothing to do. Folks, a lot of us are political people, right? We're not babies. His people were on the pack. So he said, we had nothing to do. We had this. Now, probably you could trace it down with emails, but they're pretty smart. They don't even send, probably just phone calls. But look, it was a pack with many of his friends. It was a Cruz super PAC. I think he even said, well, it wasn't really meant for us. It was a Cruz PAC. It was his people. Okay, so they sent out the first picture. Please remember that. Number two, his father. I don't know his father. I met him once. I think he's a lovely guy. I think he's a lovely guy. All I did is point out the fact that on the cover of the National Enquirer, there was a picture of him and crazy Lee Harvey Oswald having breakfast. Now, Ted never denied that it was his father. Instead, he said, Donald Trump, I had nothing to do with it. This was a magazine that, frankly, in many respects, should be very respected. They got OJ, they got Edwards, they got this. I mean, if that was the New York Times, they would have gotten Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting. I've always said, why didn't the National Enquirer get the Pulitzer Prize for Edwards and O.J. Simpson and all of these things? But anyway, so they have a picture, an old picture, having breakfast with Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, nothing, I'm not saying anything. They said, and here's how the press takes that story. So this had nothing to do with me, except I might have pointed it out, but it had nothing to do with me. I have no control over anything. I might have pointed it out. But they never denied. Did anybody ever deny that it was the father? They're not saying, oh, that wasn't really my father. It's a little hard to do, because it looked like him. So here's the story. The press takes that and they say, Donald Trump and his conspiracy theories, he went out and said his father was with Lee Harvey Oswald and he assassinated the president. What did I do? So two things. Those were the 2 points. So on those 2 points, he said about the endorsement, and I just had it cleared up. I think I'm doing the right thing in doing it, but I have to do it. Number one, the Heidi thing you understand now. Number two, I know nothing about his father.
Well, believe it or not, the full release of all files related to the JFK assassination has been delayed yet again, this time until 2021. The president delayed the release in the name of national security, but it raises the question, what possible national security interest could be served at this point in protecting information about an assassination that occurred 55 years ago? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the author of American Values. He is, of course, the nephew of the slain president. He joins us tonight. It's such an odd... I've never done a segment on the assassination before, but I'm so struck by how weird this story is. The president has said point-blank a couple of times, I'm going to release all these files. He was convinced, for some reason, not to release them. What do you imagine that reason really was?
Well, I share your mystification. The stuff that's dribbling out, it is information that tends to connect the CIA to the assassination in one way or the other. I mean, the last one that they let out, what was it, in November, they let a batch out, and that showed that Charles Cavell, who was the mayor of Dallas at the time my uncle was assassinated, was actually a CIA operative and had been a CIA operative since 1956. And then there was also some information about the automobile that showed that the window had been replaced. Again, information that 50 years later, people should know about, people should have access to that kind of information, and it's bizarre that they still continue to sit on it.
Do you believe that the CIA or another government agency was in any way involved in the assassination of your uncle?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that that possibility has been eliminated. A lot of people don't understand that when John Kennedy was killed, my father really was Attorney General. And so one of the defenses of the Warren Commission was, well, Bobby Kennedy was the best investigator of that era. He was like Mueller of that era. You know, he had been for 10 years, he'd been investigating the unions and the Teamsters and the mob. And so why wouldn't he investigate it? But the truth is, the day that his brother was killed, he lost all of the investigative capacity at the Department of Justice. He had 30,000 FBI agents who worked for him, but he never talked to J. Edgar Hoover again, not a single time after my Uncle Jack was killed. Oh, he really had no, you know, because Hoover at that time began reporting directly to Johnson. And my father, who was ostensibly Hoover's boss, really lost control of the FBI and the investigative capacity of the Department of Justice, and he resigned soon afterward.
I just find the whole thing remarkable that the Attorney General of the United States, later a U.S. Senator, a person in a position to have a lot of information, would suspect his own CIA, and now the documents are still being withheld by that same agency. I think it's really fascinating. The book is American Values, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It is out, and we urge you to check it out. Bobby Kennedy, thanks very much for that. I appreciate it.
Here's some of what we learned from documents that were allowed to go public. In the aftermath of the assassination, the Soviets apparently worried they would be blamed for putting Lee Harvey Oswald up to the attack. More on that later. Also, the CIA once intercepted a phone call from Lee Harvey Oswald to the KGB's department in charge of sabotage and assassination before Oswald murdered the president. Another interesting item, a British newspaper received an anonymous phone call about, quote, big news in the U.S. 25 minutes before JFK was shot. So there actually was some big news in here, Kimberly.
You know, it's interesting because this is, I found, to be one of the more fascinating topics. Did you ever think in our, lifetime that they would reopen these files? And it's the question that I'm getting from everyone is, what are we going to find out? Are some things going to be held back? And I said, well, I think we're going to find out what they feel comfortable with us, knowing in terms of what transpired here. And I think it's an important moment in American political history and just in transparency for our government also, because a lot of times we'll say to other governments, what you guys are doing, you're not being transparent, you're not being open. And I think this shows that actually we trust the American people to know this information, even though this dealt with one of our top secret intelligence agencies. And to me, that's like kind of the most compelling aspect. I don't know that I necessarily found something in this that was earth-shattering. Or altered kind of my fact pattern or the chronology as a prosecutor of what I thought went down. But in that very sense, I think it's helpful because people were thinking there was a big conspiracy behind this and wondering what was going on and if our government was keeping secrets from us.
You can't get away from the Russians, Greg. The Russians, they keep coming up.
They're
in every
everywhere.
block in this show.
You know what I love about the Russians? They have a department in charge of sabotage and assassination. It is like they play the villain to a T. They'll put the sign up there and say, just go to the Department of Assassination and Sabotage. We have the cloaks over there, and the daggers are in the locker. Terrible. By the way, speaking of assassins, some of the best stuff here are the plots to kill Castro. This is the United States now. Contaminated skin diving suit, dusted with a deadly fungus inside. They were also going to booby trap what they called a spectacular seashell. So because Castro enjoyed diving, and they were going to put a shell that had bombs in it, but they couldn't find a large enough shell.
Shiny object.
I want this job. To sit around and come up with fantastic ideas, it's incredible. The only thing is that the problem with this, and I can see why some people are disappointed. It's like when you go to the carnival or a county fair and there's a sideshow and they go like, this is a bearded lady, and you're really excited as a 10-year-old, and it's just a guy in a dress.
And it pulls off.
Yeah. Or they say they always say like it's a monster rabbit, but it's like a goat with rabbit ears. And it's like, so I felt like we got led on a little bit. But my last point, Rachel Maddow just hammered Trump over this last night, saying how they couldn't get it right. She's been carnival barking for 9 months over Russian collusion with Trump, and there's more meat on a cricket in that story. So it's like she's essentially going after President Trump for what she's been doing every night from 9 to 10.
We're not clarifying a 60-year-old conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
That's basically that's exactly what happens every night. Jesse, you've done a lot of research on this today, and I wonder what your biggest takeaway was.
Well, we have a team of Waters World researchers going over this page by page, so I really don't want to speak
Investigating the
until we
Department of
know
Assassination.
the final decision that we've come to. It is funny off of Rachel Maddow how, the left fantasizes about assassinating President Trump, and then when he doesn't release things that might actually help other countries assassinate him through the CIA documents, now she's mad. So I don't know what
wait
to
a
make
minute.
of that.
That confused me.
I missed all.
She never said that.
No, isn't the left mad because Trump withheld some of the stuff because the CIA doesn't want any of their research and methodology?
Oh no, I was more confused. I was confused by the first part.
No.
Would you say?
I want to put repellent up. No.
Okay.
I was going to.
I absolutely followed everything that you were
Thank you,
saying.
Dana. It goes over some people's heads here.
Those are different documents exclusively obtained by Waters World.
Yeah, we're going to be releasing those documents later on the Waters World show on 8 o'clock on Saturday.
Well, and the other thing
big
is
seashells, big seashells.
President Trump was asked by the CIA, Richard, to hold some of these documents back, but he has, in 6 months, it will be revisited again. So we will be able to hold all of this information and bring it back up.
I don't understand. The Secret Service knew that he was going to do this, and they should have gotten their act together to release all the documents at one time.
Meaning President Trump or Lee Harvey Oswald?
No. I mean, no. See,
that would be another
Jesse's confused the whole table now. But no, I'm saying that the intelligence agencies knew the president wanted to release his documents. He sent the memo over there.
Well, it was required by the law. In 1992, the law said on October 26th, 2017, this will all be released.
Right.
Unless there's a security concern, which there was, and President Trump heeded it.
Right, and I feel as though that the Secret Service had almost a decade to get their act together and figure out the security concern and deal with it. And I applaud the president for releasing these documents because I think the American people deserve to know what happened to JFK. And I think now we can put all of these conspiracy theories to bed, the third bullet, the umbrella man, that LBJ did it. All of these conspiracy theories can now go to bed, and we can move on and say he was assassinated. We now all know. We know it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and now we know.
Well,
bravo, Mr. President.
On the 2 o'clock show today, the Daily Briefing, so Jim Woolsey, the former CIA director, was there.
Yeah.
And basically what he said is that there is a theory about this guy who was a Romanian agent, and he defected to the United States, highest level guy. And he said that Khrushchev had wanted JFK assassinated. So there was a plan going forward, but then he called it off. But Lee Harvey Oswald was such a diehard believer that he went forward with it, and then they had Jack Ruby kill him to make sure that there was that you couldn't find that connection. You buy that, Kimberly?
I got to tell you something. For me, some of these theories I'd already heard before, that weren't very revealing to me. And the Jack Ruby stuff I thought was kind of interesting. The other thing about going to get a confession in the hospital, I thought that was kind of interesting, but then really not able to do that. Was sort of a last-minute press to try to get that nugget to say, okay, we can wrap this up and close it down. History would have been very different, I think, if they had been able to obtain that. And then just the one other thing, Dana, that I found was really interesting was the phone call. There was an intercept of a phone call connecting, like we talked about the Russians. I mean, they're everywhere, between Oswald and then also a death threat against him. Those things were pretty interesting that I thought were new and kind of revealing.
I thought that Woolsey was making a lot of sense. Greg, what do you think about this British newspaper getting a warning 25 minutes before the news broke?
Sometimes I just think that is, you get a lot of chatter, I think, all the time, and you get that with terrorist attacks as well. So it may have just been a coincidence. I don't know who warned them. I don't know that part, but it's interesting when what you're getting is a look at what happens all the time, things that you don't know what's going on. When I go back to the Castro stuff, we were doing this too. We were planning to off, the head of a country because, because we didn't like him. And I look at this stuff and I go, this is really amazing. And we must be doing this now, or maybe we don't. But I wonder how many people have no idea what we're talking about, because
you know, it's 50 some odd, what is it, 60, how many years, where are we now? 53 years ago? 50 something?
Yes,
50?
54.
Yeah. 54, yeah. So many humans spend so much time in fictitious worlds, you know, playing video games that history is not as interesting.
It does also